Harry not being there is truly shocking because Harry and Peter used to be very close, but like everybody previously close to Harry, the relationship is now over. We've seen that with Charles, we've seen that with William, we've seen that with Harry's best friends from his military times and when he was at school.
For years, Prince Harry's departure from royal life has been wrapped in competing narratives, carefully crafted statements, and endless public speculation. But now, a voice from inside the royal family has stepped forward with revelations that are sending shockwaves through royal circles. Peter Phillips, known for avoiding public drama, has reportedly exposed details that challenge everything many believed about Harry's choices, loyalties, and private conduct. Could this be the moment the carefully guarded story finally begins to unravel? What emerged next left even long-time royal observers stunned. Before we continue, we want to hear from you. Do you think Prince Harry has been misunderstood by the public? Or do you believe the full truth is only now coming to light? Share your view in the comments below. To help us create more videos and uncover the latest royal drama, please subscribe. Peter Phillips' verdict hurts Harry. 5 years after stepping away from royal life in search of independence, Prince Harry finds himself facing a question that refuses to disappear. It is a question that has followed him through interviews, public appearances, family disputes, and fractured friendships. At what point does a recurring outcome stop looking like bad luck and start looking like a pattern? The answer may lie in one of the most understated developments of recent years, not in a dramatic television interview or a public confrontation, but in the quiet fading of a connection that once appeared steady and unshakable. The importance of that shift becomes clearer when viewed through the person often linked to it, Peter Phillips. Unlike many figures connected to the British royal family, Peter Phillips has never actively pursued attention or public influence. Raised by Princess Anne without a royal title, he grew up with a strong emphasis on discipline, responsibility, and the idea that personal achievement should come through effort rather than inherited status. Over time, he developed a reputation for being practical, reserved, and notably free from scandal. Within royal circles, he is often described as someone who prioritizes loyalty over visibility and long-term relationships over public approval. That reputation gives weight to his role within the wider family network. He was not a distant observer of events surrounding Prince Harry, but someone present during several emotionally significant periods. Following the death of Princess Diana, he was among the relatives who shared the atmosphere of grief and adjustment that shaped the younger generation of royals. Years later, during the funeral of Prince Philip, he was visibly positioned in a delicate moment between Prince Harry and Prince William, as their strained relationship unfolded under global attention. That position required restraint, awareness, and emotional sensitivity rather than public commentary. For a long time, Peter was seen as one of the few figures able to maintain relatively balanced ties across different branches of the family. His attendance at the wedding of Harry and Meghan Markle was widely interpreted as a sign of goodwill and continuity, even as tensions were beginning to surface elsewhere. This is why any suggestion of distance or reduced contact now draws attention. In royal environments, relationships rarely break suddenly. They tend to shift slowly, shaped by accumulated misunderstandings, unresolved tensions, and repeated attempts at repair. When someone known for stability and caution steps back quietly, it often signals something more meaningful than a public disagreement ever could. What makes this development more revealing is the broader context surrounding Harry in recent years. Across family ties, friendships, and long-standing connections, patterns of strain have become increasingly visible. Each case may have its own explanation, but when viewed together, they form a wider and more complex picture about distance, decisions, and the long-term consequences of choices made under intense public pressure. What could possibly explain how people from entirely different chapters of Prince Harry's life are all reaching the same conclusion about him? Is this just coincidence? Or does Peter Phillips' latest distancing reveal a deeper pattern that has been quietly forming all along, impossible for even insiders to ignore? Let's uncover the astonishing details. Peter Phillips fuels growing questions. What makes this story so compelling is not a single disagreement, a family dispute, or even one broken friendship. It is the sheer number of people who, despite coming from completely different chapters of Prince Harry's life, seem to have arrived at remarkably similar conclusions. Now, with Peter Phillips appearing to distance himself as well, attention is once again turning toward a pattern that has become increasingly difficult to dismiss, especially among those who closely follow royal developments and long-standing personal ties within the family network. The most striking part is not that relationships have ended. Public figures often lose touch with old friends and relatives as their lives change, and shifting priorities can naturally reshape even the strongest bonds. What stands out here is how long many of these people remained loyal before finally stepping away. They were not casual acquaintances who drifted off at the first sign of trouble or distance. These were individuals who had known Harry through some of the most important and formative periods of his life, and who appeared willing for years to give him every possible benefit of the doubt, even as circumstances around him continued to evolve. Across royal circles, military friendships, school connections, and professional relationships, the same story seems to surface repeatedly in different forms and from different voices. Former companions from Eton remembered a young man long before global headlines followed his every move and shaped public perception of him. Fellow servicemen shared experiences that few outsiders could truly understand, built on trust, discipline, and shared hardship. Members of the royal household witnessed his transformation over decades from within the institution itself, observing both personal and public shifts. Yet one after another, many of those bonds appear to have weakened, faded, or disappeared entirely over time. The move to California is often mentioned as a major turning point in this narrative. Friends who had remained close for years reportedly found communication becoming increasingly difficult as distance, lifestyle, and priorities changed. Some held on, believing the Harry they once knew would eventually reappear beneath the weight of circumstance and change. Others waited patiently through public controversies, private tensions, and growing separation. Yet many eventually reached a point where maintaining the relationship no longer seemed sustainable or meaningful. What gives these developments their significance is the diversity of the people involved and the consistency of the accounts. The celebrity world presents a similar picture, although the dynamics there are less emotional and more strategic. Some of the most influential figures once associated with Harry and Meghan appeared central to their public journey. Among them was Oprah Winfrey, whose interview with the couple in 2021 became one of the most talked-about television events in recent memory and attracted an audience of around 50 million viewers worldwide. At the time, her support seemed invaluable, yet observers have noted that, in the years that followed, she did not become a visible champion of many of the couple's later projects. From royal relatives to Hollywood power brokers, the names may differ, but the direction of the story often appears remarkably similar. And as the list continues to grow, the question being asked is no longer why one relationship ended, but why so many seem to follow the same path. The once close-knit circle around Harry and Meghan now appears carefully recalibrated, with subtle distance replacing old alliances. What caused this quiet shift in Hollywood and royal-adjacent spaces, and how did figures like Oprah Winfrey begin balancing proximity and caution in a story that refuses to settle? Let's find out. The quiet recalibration of influence. The carefully managed distance that now surrounds Harry and Meghan is not loud, but it is clear to those watching closely. What once looked like an unbreakable circle of allies has slowly shifted into a pattern of caution, timing, and quiet repositioning across Hollywood and royal-adjacent spaces. Oprah Winfrey, once a central figure in their public narrative, is often described by media analyst Paula Frolick as maintaining a calculated balance. She stays close enough to remain connected if a major story breaks, yet far enough to avoid being pulled into any ongoing fallout. It is not friendship in the simple sense, but a form of careful professional awareness shaped by experience in high-profile stories. In Montecito, the early warmth of support from figures like George and Amal Clooney has also evolved. What began with private jets and Lake Como gatherings has shifted into a more visible closeness with King Charles and the circles around William and Catherine. The tone of relationships, once openly supportive, now appears more measured and politically aware. David Beckham's visit to the Invictus Games marked another turning point. He reportedly traveled with genuine intent to show support, only to leave feeling the reception was colder than expected. Since then, both he and Victoria Beckham have been increasingly seen in warmer proximity to the Wales family, a change observers have not ignored. Even in entertainment circles, the silence is noticeable. Idris Elba, who once DJ'd at their wedding reception, has remained publicly quiet about the couple in recent years. Serena Williams, previously one of Meghan's strongest public supporters, has also stepped back from visible commentary. Meanwhile, a Netflix-backed production tied to their growing media ambitions struggled to produce the star power expected from such a well-connected network. Despite the wedding guest list reading like a global celebrity index, the most recognizable face attached to the project became Chrissy Teigen, a detail that surprised many in industry discussions. Observers suggest this gradual reshaping reflects how proximity in elite circles often changes with time, reputation, and shifting loyalties, leaving relationships defined more by caution than closeness over time now. In a world where Hollywood decisions are rarely seen as coincidence, but as coded signals of power and influence, what does a single casting choice truly reveal? And why are insiders suddenly pointing toward Harry and Meghan, suggesting they may be misreading the very messages shaping their place in the industry? Let's reveal the shocking details behind it all. The signal behind the silence. In an industry built on networking and status signals, where a celebrity's involvement in a project speaks as loudly as any marketing campaign, a single casting choice is rarely seen as chance alone. In many corners of Hollywood, such moments are read as signals, subtle messages about belonging, influence, and who remains in favor. Insiders often frame these developments less as accidents and more as communication, in a language the industry rarely explains openly. One Daily Mail insider put it bluntly, saying Harry and Meghan never think it is them. When setbacks occur or professional ties fade, the explanation is frequently directed outward, toward systems, institutions, or perceived bias. Critics argue this pattern leads to a familiar phrase that has gained traction in commentary: architects of their own demise. That phrase, they suggest, shifts attention away from external villains and toward personal decisions, repeated behaviors, and long-term consequences. In the broader Sussex narrative, the couple has often positioned themselves as responding to hostility from the press, the institution, and wider cultural forces. Supporters of the critics counter that these explanations overlook a recurring constant at the center of each dispute. They insist that the common factor is not the environment, but the individuals themselves, who appear in every version of the outcome. Tom Bauer has been frequently cited for tracing what he describes as a longer pattern of strained or damaged relationships predating the royal period. In this reading, a casting decision or professional shift is not treated as random misfortune, but as a deliberate signal carried through the industry's quiet system of presence and absence, where who shows up and who does not become part of the message being sent over. Time observers argue that the repeated pattern of explanations pointing outward toward institutions, press, or culture gradually builds a narrative in which external forces appear as the only cause, yet critics insist the wider picture shows something else entirely: the accumulation of outcomes tied to consistent choices and reactions that repeat across different settings, suggesting that the real constant is not the environment but the central figures themselves, whose presence in every version of the story cannot be ignored, even as debate continues over interpretation and responsibility in commentary and public perception across media circles worldwide today now. He has raised a question that leaves many deeply uneasy. At what point does Prince Harry himself become another casualty of the very pattern he has been living inside, the cycle of being left rather than the one choosing to leave? Why do close relationships appear to fracture despite stepping away from royal pressure, and is this really just palace politics or something more personal unfolding beneath the surface? Let's unravel the details. When bonds fade beyond the crown. He has raised the question that makes some people genuinely and specifically uncomfortable. At what point does Harry himself become another casualty of the same pattern he has been living inside, the one left behind, rather than the one doing the leaving? It is a question worth sitting with seriously, not as an attack, but as an honest observation about where the trajectory leads when traced across time and relationships. Observers keep noting that if leaving royal life was only about palace politics and pressure, personal friendships should have remained intact. The men he served with in the military, who understood parts of his life no civilian could fully reach, and school friends who held no titles or agenda, all once formed a circle of trust. Their distance now is what complicates the simple idea that only the institution caused the separation. If the institution were the source, stepping away from it should have protected the personal bonds, yet that is not what appears to have happened. That widening pattern is why commentators return again and again to the question of what is really unfolding beneath the surface. Now consider who Harry was before all this scrutiny hardened the picture. He carried a rare warmth, able to move through military bases, children's hospitals, and crowded public events in the United Kingdom and abroad, making people feel seen rather than simply acknowledged. It was not just the weight of a title or the legacy of Princess Diana that shaped that response, but a natural mix of humor, ease, and openness. People did not simply respect him, they liked him, often in a way that felt personal and unforced. That kind of connection built loyalty across very different groups, from soldiers to school friends to strangers who only met him once, which is why the later departures from his circle feel so significant and difficult to dismiss. They matter precisely because those early connections were real, freely given, and not built on status alone. Some observers even wonder quietly whether Harry himself is becoming part of the very pattern people once thought he was escaping. The uncomfortable thought is not about blame, but about how personal change, distance, and pressure can reshape even the strongest bonds over time. What remains striking is how the early image of openness and connection still stands in contrast to the quieter story of separation that followed. In the end, what draws attention is not a single event, but a long unfolding shift in relationships that once seemed unbreakable, from royal circles to personal friendships built in places like schoolyards and army camps, leaving many still trying to understand what changed and why it matters so deeply today. By 2026, the man at the center of these claims appears noticeably changed, shaped by years of legal battles, public accusations, and deep family tensions. But what truly caused this transformation, and how did press wars, personal blame, and carefully chosen words combine to reshape his voice, image, and identity in the eyes of those who once knew him best? Let's find out. A life recast in the public eye. In 2026, the man many commentators describe is said to feel like someone reshaped by time, conflict, and distance. To some who knew him earlier, the change is difficult to ignore. The long legal battles with the British press, stretching across years, sit heavily behind this new public image. So do repeated public claims that his own family became figures of blame within his personal story of struggle. Even the way he speaks in interviews, as former staff member Grant Harold and others have suggested, feels carefully formed, almost like rehearsed therapy, rather than natural speech, as if borrowed words have replaced an older, simpler voice. Different voices in the media, including commentator Rob Shooter, take this further. Shooter argues that Prince Harry carries deep anger toward the royal family, and may even act with clear intent to damage their image. If that view is correct, then the softer idea of confusion or helplessness becomes harder to maintain. It suggests choice rather than accident, direction rather than drift. Yet this remains a matter of interpretation, and many still disagree on what is truly driving his public actions. What complicates the picture even more is what has faded quietly in the background. Friendships that once seemed solid, especially those outside royal duty, appear to have weakened over time. People who had no role in palace affairs or public strategy, but simply shared personal history, are no longer visible in his circle. That loss makes it harder to say his journey is only about institution and pressure. Peter Phillips knew Prince Harry long before the current controversies. Their connection was built in younger years, during family gatherings, shared events, and moments that carried no public performance. Phillips once saw a version of Harry who showed up at funerals, supported family moments, and moved through duty with ease and sincerity. There was no media plan behind those actions, only habit and upbringing. Over time, even Phillips and others close to that earlier version have reached a quiet conclusion that the person seen today feels different from the one they once knew. That realization did not come from drama or public confrontation. It came slowly, through distance and observation, until even a brief comment carried weight far beyond its length. While this shift is discussed outside, the royal family itself continues in a steady pattern, choosing discipline and silence over reaction, allowing events to pass without becoming the center of them. Across public debate and private reflection, the question of who he was and who he has become continues to grow, shaped by memory, perception, and the distance between past familiarity and present reality. It remains open. Public attention in 2026 has shifted toward William and Catherine, where trust and consistency now matter more than polished royal narratives. But what exactly sparked this renewed public confidence? And how did Catherine's return after a difficult private season reshape perceptions of the monarchy in a way no strategy could control? Let's uncover the intriguing details. Duty, distance, changing royal landscape. Public attention has settled around the royal family with a clarity that feels sharper in 2026, where trust, presence, and consistency now shape opinion more than carefully managed stories. William and Catherine stand at the center of this shift, their public roles strengthened by steady appearances and a renewed warmth from people who see Catherine's return to duty after a difficult private season as something real rather than constructed. That reaction has grown naturally, in a way that even modern communication strategies struggle to imitate, and it echoes memories of the early public appeal once associated with Harry, before his image became more controlled and distant. King Charles continues his duties with a steady discipline that reflects understanding of the institution's demands, maintaining rhythm through state visits, meetings, and ceremonial responsibilities despite years of public scrutiny and family strain. Across the wider institution, survival has not depended on dramatic reinvention, but on simple repetition of duty, where showing up becomes the quiet measure of stability and endurance. This contrast is often drawn between two public narratives, one shaped by ongoing interviews, legal disputes, and commercial projects, and another built on presence at hospitals, ceremonies, and national events, without turning attendance into publicity. That difference has become one of the clearest ways the public reads the monarchy today, separating performance from duty in a way that feels increasingly hard to ignore. Looking ahead to Peter Phillips's wedding in the Cotswolds this summer, the guest list reflects continuity rather than division, with family members who have remained steady through changing public moods expected to attend. William and Catherine are expected there, along with King Charles and Queen Camilla, in a gathering described less by ceremony and more by familiarity. Harry's absence from such a moment is unlikely to be seen as dramatic, but rather as another step in a quiet separation that has developed over time. For many observers, this absence fits into a broader pattern where distance replaces direct connection, and where personal narratives on both sides continue to diverge. In the end, what defines the current moment is not conflict in loud form, but the steady rhythm of presence, responsibility, and the quiet shaping of public perception. As 2026 unfolds, observers increasingly note that influence within the monarchy is measured less by interviews or headlines, and more by consistency in public service, personal restraint, and the ability to maintain trust across generations without constant explanation or defense. This quiet measure of stability rather than spectacle continues to define how the public interprets loyalty, duty, and distance within a family still watched closely around the world. Even as roles evolve and expectations remain high in quiet ways, the slow drift between closeness and distance rarely happens in a single moment, but through quiet choices, silence, and absence that slowly reshape everything once familiar. In a world where every word carries hidden weight, what truly lies behind the phrase "lost touch"? And how did something once close become so distant without warning? Let's find out. When silence becomes a statement. The slow build-up of distance that eventually becomes permanent does not arrive through one clear moment, but through many small choices that quietly add up. What once felt close can shift into something unfamiliar, not because of a single argument, but because of time, silence, and repeated absence. In royal circles, where words are carefully measured and meaning often hides beneath restraint, even simple phrases carry deeper weight than they appear to hold. A phrase like "lost touch" sounds casual in everyday speech, yet within a family shaped by public duty and long memory, it becomes something far more precise. By the year 2026, after a cousin's wedding placed everyone in the same emotional frame again, those words landed with unusual clarity. They were not part of a public announcement, nor were they meant to start debate, but they still spoke loudly to those who understood the history behind them. In that quiet phrasing, there was a sense that doors once kept open with patience and effort had slowly begun to close without ceremony or conflict. The change was not announced in anger, nor marked by confrontation, but shaped by years of distance that grew too steady to ignore. Around the same time, other voices connected to Harry's wider circle also drifted into silence, reinforcing a pattern that was hard to miss. Each departure carried no formal farewell, only distance, which in itself became the clearest message of all. Unlike public disputes that demand attention, this kind of quiet separation offers no space for response or correction. It simply existed, settled into place, and made itself known through absence rather than declaration. Whether a path remains back toward what once was is now uncertain, shaped by layers of experience that have built up over time. What is clear is that distance has moved beyond circumstance and into structure, becoming part of how relationships are now defined. In this environment, silence itself carries meaning, often saying more than any carefully chosen sentence could. Even without statements or open conflict, understanding spreads through what is not said and what is no longer done. In the end, the quiet closure of such ties does not need recognition to be real because its effects are already felt. It is this absence of noise that makes the message so powerful, especially for those who know the history behind it. What remains is not confrontation, but distance that has settled so deeply it no longer needs explanation. The story now rests in that space between memory and acceptance, where nothing is said, yet everything is understood. Subtle words once spoken continue to echo quietly across a family that has learned restraint over time. So, what do you think Peter Phillips just exposed about Harry that's so devastating it could change everything? Would you believe it? We'd like to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe.